Hey there, fellow literature explorers. Today, we turn our gaze toward The Dark Knight Rises, 2012, a superhero epic that offers much more than narrative surface. It's a text rich with thematic complexity, symbolic resonance, and intricate character work that invites rigorous analysis. I'm delighted you've joined me, because in this video, we'll engage in a detailed examination of its cinematic language, narrative structure, and intertextual layers that shape its meaning. We'll begin by situating the film within its cultural and theoretical context, unpacking its stylistic choices and the director's auteur signature. Next, I'll provide a concise yet nuanced overview of the narrative arc, highlighting the story's core motifs without diluting its interpretive possibilities. From there, we'll delve into a compelling plot summary that foregrounds its narrative strategies and rhetorical devices, all framed to prepare you for the unfolding complexities. Crucially, we'll tease key thematic elements and pivotal narrative shifts, those moments that challenge conventional readings and open the text to multiple interpretations. Throughout, expect us to consider character dynamics, cinematic techniques like mise-en-scene and editing, and the work's engagement with broader discourses in film and literary theory. Prepare to engage with this story not just as viewers, but as scholars, questioning, interpreting, and appreciating the layers beneath its surface. So, get comfortable, sharpen your critical lens, and let's embark on an intellectually rewarding exploration of this cinematic work. From the opening moments, the narrative situates us in a space of myth. Years have passed since the city was saved by sacrifice, but time has not been kind. A sense of decay permeates the streets, order maintained only by silence and lies, stability hiding cracks just beneath the surface. The hero who once stood as symbol is now recluse, body broken, spirit buried under guilt. He is a ghost wandering halls of his own mansion, a reminder that even icons cannot escape gravity of loss. This early stillness is crucial. It grounds spectacle in fragility, reminding us that masks cannot forever shield the human beneath. The overview of the story pivots on collision between decline and resurgence. The city, outwardly calm, is hollow at its core. Into this vacuum steps a new adversary, a figure forged in darkness, voice echoing with menace, body as imposing as fortress. Unlike previous foes who thrived on chaos or ideology, this one brings order of a different kind, an authoritarian vision where strength crushes weakness, where survival demands submission. The antagonist does not simply threaten the city physically. He dismantles its myth, dragging its protector from shadows into brutal light. Parallel to this is emergence of unexpected allies, figures of cunning, charm, and ambivalence, whose loyalties flicker like candle flames. They complicate narrative, weaving tension between trust and betrayal, necessity and self-interest. The plot pulses with crescendos and collapses. Early scenes reintroduce us to a world no longer aflame but quietly rotting. The hero, limping, withdrawn, is lured back into conflict by whispers of conspiracy, theft, and looming siege. At first, his attempt to rise feels almost tragicomic, gadgets and willpower pushing against brittle bones, ideals colliding with disillusionment. Yet hope seems to glimmer, a chance for redemption, perhaps even connection with those who challenge him. But then comes the breaking. The confrontation with the masked adversary is staged not as duel but as dismantling, every punch a philosophy, every blow a symbol. The fall is literal and figurative, leaving protector shattered, cast into abyss. From here, the narrative sharpens. The city is overtaken, its institutions gutted, its people manipulated by rhetoric of liberation that cloaks tyranny. Streets once bustling are now arenas of spectacle, trials turned into theater of vengeance. The antagonist rules with iron certainty, while beneath the earth, the one who once defended it languishes in prison carved from despair. Yet it is within that pit, surrounded by chants of nameless prisoners, that rebirth begins. The climb becomes central metaphor. To rise is not only to escape walls of stone but to shed fear itself. The image of rope removed, leap made without safety, crystallizes theme of transcendence, freedom earned not by tools but by will. As momentum gathers, threads intertwine. The cunning thief reveals layers of vulnerability beneath bravado, her shifting loyalties driven less by greed than by survival in a city that abandoned her kind. The loyal officer becomes moral compass, his faith in justice unshaken even as institutions crumble. Old allies return, wounds of past carried into present, their presence reminders that no one rises alone. Meanwhile, secrets long buried surface. Revelations of lineage, of legacy, of truths twisted into lies. Each twist reframes narrative, deepening mythos while tightening noose around fate of city. The climax surges like storm. The hero, risen from pit, returns not as savior untouchable but as man reconciled with fear, his fragility now his strength. Battles erupt across frozen streets, armies colliding beneath snow-filled skies. Tanks roll, fists clash, ideals are tested in roar of chaos. At heart of conflict stands confrontation between will and tyranny, between endurance and brute force. The struggle is brutal, desperate, uncertain. Yet in every punch, every gasp, symbols collide as much as bodies. The final act teases both resolution and ambiguity. A ticking clock looms, device of annihilation threatening to erase all. The chase across city, the sacrifice made, the planes soaring into horizon, it all carries operatic weight. And then, in aftermath, silence. Statues rise, stories are told, legacies reframed. Yet ambiguity lingers. Was the end final, or was rebirth greater than death? The closing images leave us suspended, torn between mourning and hope, loss and continuation. The story's excitement lies not only in spectacle but in its layering. It asks, what does it mean to rise? To fall? To inherit? To sacrifice? It weaves mythology into action, philosophy into combat, symbolism into architecture. The prison pit, the broken mask, the whisper of a name, the flicker of a smile, all become signifiers inviting interpretation. It is not simply story of city saved but of identity remade, of myth confronted, of humanity rediscovered beneath cape and cowl. And teasing its key elements, we find defiance of simple readings. The villain is monster and visionary, tyrant and prophet. The allies are helpers and betrayers, shadows and lights. The hero is savior and failure, martyr and man. The ending is closure and opening, death and survival. Each twist destabilizes certainty, urging us to question, interpret, engage. This is why the narrative endures, not for gadgets or battles alone, but for how it transforms them into allegory. It is story of collapse and rise, of fear and courage, of lies that uphold systems and truths that shatter them. Its world is spectacle, yes, but also mirror. And in that mirror, we see ourselves. Fragile, striving, rising, always at edge of fall. The city that emerges in this story is never still, never safe, and never simply a backdrop for spectacle. It breathes with history, carrying the scars of battles already fought, the wounds that have shaped its people and institutions. This duality is the perfect canvas for the film's exploration of collapse and renewal, the fragile balance between order and chaos. What gives the narrative such resonance is that this world feels less like fantasy and more like a distorted reflection of our own, where trust in systems is precarious and where resilience must be constantly rediscovered. The journey of its central figure captures this tension in full. Once the city's unyielding guardian, he is now diminished, his absence a silence that weighs heavily. His retreat is both physical and psychological, his body wrecked by years of violence, his mind clouded with disillusionment. Yet the call to return arrives, inevitable and uncompromising. What unfolds is not the story of a flawless savior but of a man scarred, limping, uncertain, who must test the limits of both body and will to reclaim his place. This tension, between human frailty and the demand for myth, gives the narrative its profound emotional weight. It is not strength alone that defines him, but the choice to rise when rising seems impossible. The antagonist he faces could not be more different from the chaos of the past. Where once madness reigned with laughter and fire, now comes order, brutal, suffocating, unrelenting. His presence is an immovable wall, his ideology as rigid as the mask that hides his pain. He speaks not of randomness but of destiny, of breaking systems with discipline and precision. His menace is not theatrical but methodical, and in that steadiness lies terror. He strips the city of its illusions, exposing how easily fear can masquerade as freedom, how revolutions can become cages. Entangled in this struggle is a thief whose presence electrifies the story with ambiguity. She glides through its corridors like a shadow, sometimes ally, sometimes adversary, always unpredictable. Her motives are survival, yet beneath the surface flickers something deeper. The possibility of transformation, of choosing principle over self-preservation. Her dance with the protagonist is both dangerous and intimate, a reminder that trust is the rarest commodity in a world where betrayal is currency. The prison sequence distills the essence of the narrative's philosophy. Here, stripped of armor and cut off from the city he swore to protect, the hero is forced to confront himself. The pit is more than stone and darkness, it is despair incarnate, a grave that whispers inevitability. To escape, one must not only climb but believe. And so the ascent becomes a ritual, each failed attempt a metaphor for surrender, each leap without the safety of a rope a defiance of fear itself. When he finally rises, it is less about strength than faith. Faith in the possibility that even broken men can transcend their limits. Above, the city sinks further into dystopia. Show trials masquerade as justice, wealth is redistributed through terror, and streets are patrolled by self-proclaimed liberators who wield oppression in the name of equality. The line between revolution and tyranny blurs until it vanishes altogether, leaving behind a chilling portrait of how easily ideals can be corrupted. What makes these sequences resonate is not their scale but their plausibility, the recognition that power, once unleashed, rarely serves the powerless. The younger detective who emerges from the margins serves as a counterpoint to all this decay. He carries no mask, no legend, only a restless conviction that justice matters even when institutions rot. His faith in the fallen guardian is less about nostalgia and more about belief in the idea he represents. It is in him that the story plants its seed of continuity, hinting that symbols, however battered, must evolve to endure. The twists that arrive near the end reframe everything. Identities long concealed erupt into revelation, betrayals cut deeper than expected, and the narrative forces us to reconsider every assumption. What once seemed straightforward reveals itself as intricately staged, with vengeance and legacy braided together in ways that shake the very foundations of the story. The final confrontation is not simply a clash of fists and fire, but a battle of wills, ideologies, and sacrifices. As the clock ticks toward annihilation, the stakes reach their peak. The city teeters, its fate resting not on invincibility but on one final act of surrender and defiance. The ending leaves us hovering between closure and ambiguity, between the certainty of sacrifice and the whisper of survival. It is this refusal to provide easy answers that makes the story linger long after the credits roll. The myth concludes with a paradox. The hero both gone and eternal, the city both scarred and renewed, the legend both finite and unending. What remains is not certainty but the invitation to interpret, to debate, to imagine. And perhaps that is the truest gift of this tale, that it refuses to be contained, instead rippling outward as myth, symbol, and memory, waiting to be reinterpreted by every generation that encounters it. The story that unfolds here is less about battles and explosions than it is about the people caught within them. Each character is a vessel for philosophy, trauma, and choice, their arcs intersecting like threads in a vast tapestry. To understand the film is to linger with these individuals, not merely as roles in a plot, but as living embodiments of ideas, contradictions, and longings. The weight of the narrative rests on their shoulders, and it is through them that we glimpse the core tensions between hope and despair, order and chaos, myth and mortality. The central figure at the heart of the tale is both larger than life and painfully human. Years of solitude and grief have hollowed him, leaving a recluse who clings to shadows instead of purpose. His mansion, once a hub of elegance, becomes a mausoleum for memory, where portraits of lost parents and absent loves haunt every corner. He is not simply tired. He is broken, both physically and spiritually. His body, battered from years of sacrifice, betrays him with every movement. Yet beneath that frailty lies the stubborn ember of duty. When the call to return arrives, he resists, but resistance proves impossible. His entire being is built upon the compulsion to protect, even when it means his own ruin. This is the tragedy of his character. Heroism not as choice, but as inevitability. And yet, in the act of rising again, he discovers that sacrifice need not only be burden, it can also be liberation. His arc, then, is not a triumph of strength but of resilience, of a man who learns that survival is not the point, endurance of meaning is. Opposite him stands the masked warrior, a figure as much myth as man. His voice is distorted, mechanical, resonant with menace. His physique a monument to discipline and brutality. But beneath the imposing armor lies a history as scarred as any. He was forged in the pit, born into suffering so absolute that it hardened him into a weapon. His ideology is not random destruction, but carefully constructed punishment. He believes that civilization must be torn down to reveal its weakness, that pain is the only true teacher. He is both liberator and tyrant, savior and executioner. What makes him fascinating is not merely his strength, but his conviction. Every word, every calculated strike, is infused with the certainty that he is fulfilling destiny. And yet, in the cracks of his stoicism, there lingers the faint trace of compassion, for the woman he serves, for the ideals that once gave him purpose. This duality makes him less a monster than a tragic zealot, a man who carries both the clarity of justice and the blindness of fanaticism. The thief who dances between these two titans brings the story an entirely different rhythm. She is not bound by ideology, nor is she weighed down by the chains of destiny. She moves with agility, wit, and the instincts of survival. Her morality is flexible, her alliances fluid, her charm both weapon and shield. She lives in the gray space of the city's underbelly, where codes of honor mean little, and survival demands cunning. Yet behind her cynicism lies a hunger for something she has long denied, redemption. She steals not merely out of greed, but out of a conviction that the system is already broken, that one must take before being taken from. But as her path intertwines with the weary guardian, the possibility of belief begins to take root. She becomes both temptation and mirror, forcing him to consider whether hope can survive in someone who has only ever trusted herself. Her transformation is not sudden but gradual, a flickering recognition that ideals, however fragile, might still be worth embracing. Hovering within this triangle of strength, cynicism, and resilience is a young detective who burns with righteous impatience. He is unmasked, unscarred by years of combat, yet unyielding in his conviction that justice still matters. He looks upon the fallen guardian not with worship, but with clarity, seeing the man beneath the symbol and refusing to let him fade into obscurity. His arc is one of inheritance, though he never seeks it. What drives him is not the allure of legend but the belief that people deserve someone to stand for them. In him, the film plants its future. He represents the idea that heroism need not be cloaked in shadows or forged in trauma. It can also emerge from simple, stubborn conviction. His role may seem secondary, yet it is essential, for he embodies continuity, the notion that symbols are only as powerful as the people who choose to carry them forward. The woman who appears to be philanthropist, ally, and confidant plays perhaps the most deceptive role of all. To the city, she is a beacon of idealism, offering resources to rebuild, a vision for a brighter future. She speaks with warmth, carries herself with grace, and seems the perfect counterbalance to the protagonist's solitude. Yet beneath her benevolence lies a fire long concealed, vengeance, inherited and nurtured until it consumes her. Her revelation as the hidden architect of the city's impending doom is not only shocking but poetic, a reminder that betrayal often masquerades as trust, and that legacies of pain can travel silently through generations before erupting in fury. She is both daughter and avenger, embodying the idea that the sins of the past refuse to remain buried. Alongside these central figures are characters whose presence deepens the story's texture. The loyal butler, who has watched the guardian since childhood, serves as conscience and grief incarnate. He pleads not for justice, but for peace, begging the man he raised to abandon the path that only leads to ruin. His tears are not manipulative but devastatingly sincere, the heartbreak of someone who loves too deeply to watch self-destruction continue. His departure marks one of the story's most painful ruptures, a reminder that even the most steadfast relationships can fracture under the weight of obsession. The police commissioner, weary from years of compromise, shoulders his own burden of lies. He has preserved peace through deception, hiding truths too unbearable for the city to confront. His guilt festers, threatening to unravel both his legacy and the fragile stability he has built. Yet he remains a figure of resilience, rallying when collapse seems inevitable, proving that even flawed men can stand tall when the hour demands it. And then there is the city itself, a character in all but name. Its streets pulse with fear and defiance, its bridges rise and fall like veins of lifeblood. It is betrayed by its elites, abandoned by its institutions, yet never entirely surrendered. Through every riot, every collapse of order, there remains a stubborn persistence in its people. A quiet reminder that resilience is not always loud, that survival can sometimes be its own act of rebellion. Each of these figures embodies a facet of the film's central themes. The Guardian represents resilience in the face of despair. The masked warrior is the embodiment of discipline twisted into fanaticism. The thief is the pragmatist caught between cynicism and hope. The young detective is the promise of renewal. The philanthropist-turned-avenger is the specter of vengeance disguised as idealism. The butler and commissioner remind us of love and guilt, the anchors that tether myths to human reality. And the city itself is the crucible where all these forces clash, break, and transform. Together, they form a constellation of contrasts: strength and fragility, vengeance and redemption, despair and hope. What makes the narrative so rich is that none of them exist as mere archetypes. Each carries contradiction, each forces us to question easy moral binaries. The Guardian is heroic yet destructive, the thief selfish yet selfless, the masked warrior brutal yet principled, the avenger nurturing yet merciless. It is in these tensions that the film achieves its power, reminding us that people are never simple, that myths are built from fractures as much as from triumphs. By the time the final curtain falls, every character has either broken or risen, and in their journeys lies the essence of the story's meaning. The hero does not triumph by defeating evil, but by enduring it. The villain does not fail through weakness, but through love unacknowledged. The thief does not escape unchanged, but transformed by belief. The detective does not remain in the margins, but steps into the light. And the city, battered and scarred, endures, because endurance is all it has ever known. This is why the film resonates not merely as spectacle, but as myth. It offers us not perfect heroes or irredeemable villains, but people caught in the impossible, forced to choose again and again whether to surrender or to rise. And in those choices, in their frailty and defiance, we glimpse ourselves, our fears, our hopes, our endless, stumbling attempts to create meaning in the face of despair. The story of this film does not end on screen. Its creation is as layered and enigmatic as the narrative it tells, filled with strange occurrences, unexpected setbacks, and haunting details that blur the line between myth and reality. To watch the finished work is to witness spectacle. To watch the finished work is to witness spectacle, but to trace the path of its making is to step into a labyrinth where accidents turn to legends, choices carried hidden symbolism, and coincidences echoed eerily through the production. What unfolded behind the cameras was every bit as dramatic, every bit as uncanny, as the battles that raged across the city within the story. The first of these strangest facts lies in the opening set piece. The prologue, a daring mid-air heist staged with real aircraft, was filmed in Iceland using an actual Hercules C-130 and a modified fuselage of a smaller plane suspended by wires. No green screens, no digital composites for the bulk of it, just rail metal tearing through sky. This decision was not only a feat of practical filmmaking but also a perilous gamble. The crew had to engineer ways to detach fuselage panels mid-flight without destabilizing the craft, while stunt performers dangled thousands of feet above the earth. The pilot who maneuvered the massive transport craft later admitted that the turbulence was so violent he briefly lost visual contact with the horizon. Yet the director insisted on shooting with IMAX cameras mounted directly onto the fuselage, risking lenses worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to capture authenticity. That those cameras survived at all is its own miracle. Perhaps even stranger than the mechanics of the heist was the sound. The antagonist's muffled voice, filtered through his mechanical mask, became a topic of near-obsessive debate before release. Early test screenings left audiences baffled. They could barely decipher a word he said. Critics compared the audio to listening through a pillow. Yet the director, steadfast in his vision, initially refused to alter the sound. He believed the muffled cadence added menace, forcing audiences to lean into the character's physical presence rather than his clarity. Eventually, after mounting pressure, a compromise was reached. Sound engineers reworked the mix, brightening certain frequencies and layering in subtle resonance, but the voice never lost its eerie, disembodied quality. The strangest part? In foreign language dubs, the problem disappeared entirely. The translations delivered clean, booming diction, which made the original version's opacity even more peculiar. Accidents stalked the production like uninvited guests. And Hathaway, tasked with embodying the agile and calculating thief, trained for months in martial arts and whip techniques. Yet during one rehearsal, she misjudged the swing of her stunt double's foot and ended up with a black eye. Later, while filming a chase sequence, she narrowly avoided catastrophe when the Batpod, a monstrous motorcycle designed for impossible maneuvers, skidded and almost launched itself into a nearby camera rig. Remarkably, the crew reported that she laughed it off and climbed back on, joking that the vehicle had a vendetta against her heels. For a film shrouded in solemnity, the set was often punctured by these bizarre, almost slapstick episodes. Not all strangeness was humorous. On a rooftop set, an IMAX camera was accidentally destroyed when it collided with the massive, tank-like Batmobile. The crash reduced a $500,000 piece of technology to shards of glass and twisted steel. The crew winced, not only for the cost but for the irony. This was the second IMAX camera lost during the trilogy's production. The first had been obliterated while filming the chase sequence in the preceding chapter. It became something of a superstition. Whenever one of these cameras was rolled onto set, whispers of "third time's the charm" rippled among crew members. Thankfully, no third destruction occurred, though operators joked about ensuring their lenses with the same reverence people reserve for priceless art. The production also flirted with uncanny coincidences. A key sequence depicts the city's football stadium collapsing mid-game. To stage this, the filmmakers worked with the Pittsburgh Steelers, using real players and crowds of extras. As the field imploded with carefully rigged explosives, the surviving wide receiver runs down the field alone, the ground splitting behind him. What makes this so strange is that the fictional team's name, Gotham Rogues, eerily echoed real controversies at the time about rogue behavior in professional sports, almost as if the film anticipated headlines. Even stranger, when the extras, local fans of the Steelers, screamed and panicked on cue, their fear felt almost too real. Several later admitted they forgot they were acting, that the blasts and shaking stands triggered primal terror. For days afterward, they reported dreaming of the ground opening beneath their feet. One of the most unsettling layers of production came from its timing. Filming began as the world was still reeling from economic collapse, and much of the story's imagery, revolutions, toppled institutions, street justice, felt chillingly resonant. By the time of release, real protests had erupted across global cities, with imagery uncannily resembling the film's depictions of mobs storming financial districts. Crowds overturning cars and chanting slogans outside Wall Street appeared almost indistinguishable from the fictional uprising on screen. The line between art and reality blurred until audiences wondered whether the film had been inspired by events, or had anticipated them. The actors themselves carried strange burdens. Christian Bale, returning to the role of the weary guardian, admitted that he adopted an almost monk-like isolation during shooting. He would retreat into silence between takes, disappearing into his trailer to brood alone. Crew members described him as oscillating between intensity and exhaustion, as though he were living the decline of his character in real time. Yet he also delivered moments of bizarre levity, once reportedly singing sea shanties in full costume to lighten the mood. The duality of his presence, tormented one moment, absurdly playful the next, added a layer of surrealism to the set. Tom Hardy, meanwhile, endured an ordeal with the antagonist's mask. It restricted his breathing, muffled his speech, and left his skin raw after hours of wear. He joked that he spent more time with makeup artists adjusting straps than with fellow actors. But what makes his experience stranger is that he insisted on maintaining posture and voice even off-camera. Crew members recalled him ordering food at lunch in the same muffled growl, baffling servers who assumed he was playing a prank. His devotion to remaining within the character's skin, even when no cameras rolled, added an eerie weight to his performance, as though the mask had fused with the man beneath. And Hathaway's casting itself became a curious tale. Initially, she auditioned under the impression she was reading for a role entirely different, the villainous Harley Quinn. Only later did she realize she was being tested for the thief. When she received the news, she reportedly burst into laughter, confessing that she had practiced cackling maniacally for weeks, only to be handed a whip instead. This misunderstanding colored her preparation, giving her performance an edge of unpredictability that critics later praised. Even the locations seemed to rebel. A massive winter sequence was staged in Manhattan, with snow machines blanketing Wall Street in flurries of artificial ice. The production chose summer months for the shoot, which meant actors sweltered under coats while pretending to shiver. Extras fainted from heatstroke while cameras rolled on their simulated frost-bitten faces. To make matters stranger, the day after filming wrapped, an actual snowstorm swept into the city unseasonably early. Crew members joked that the production had summoned winter itself, that the city refused to let go of its role once the cameras left. One of the most haunting coincidences occurred at the premiere. The film was poised to become a cultural event, yet tragedy struck when a mass shooting unfolded at a midnight screening in Aurora, Colorado. The horror of that night forever intertwined with the film, casting a shadow no one could have predicted. Though not part of the production itself, this event marked one of the strangest and most devastating intersections between cinema and real life, as if the darkness on screen had seeped outward into the world. Cast and crew responded with grief and silence, their celebration of artistry swallowed by mourning. It remains one of the most somber facts tied to the film's history, a reminder of how stories can resonate in ways beyond anyone's control. Among lighter curiosities, the film's use of IMAX cameras was revolutionary, yet riddled with peculiarities. The sheer size of the reels meant they could only shoot for about 2 minutes before reloading. Actors had to deliver performances in bursts, aware that any stumble wasted miles of film. On one occasion, Christian Bale reportedly burst out laughing mid-scene when the camera jammed noisily during an intense moment, shattering the solemn mood. The crew, used to the temperamental machines, simply shrugged. By then, technical glitches had become part of the strange rhythm of production. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who played the idealistic detective, carried his own odd trivia. During one night shoot, he cycled through the city streets on a regular bicycle between takes, attempting to blend in with locals. The sight of him pedaling in full police costume, nodding to late-night pedestrians who assumed he was a real officer, became one of the crew's favorite stories. He later admitted he enjoyed the anonymity. People believed him authentic precisely because he looked too exhausted to be acting. Then there was Michael Caine, whose character is absent from much of the film. He confessed in interviews that he spent weeks away from set, returning only for pivotal emotional scenes. But in those brief appearances, he carried an almost spectral weight. Crew members noted that when he delivered his tearful monologue to the protagonist, silence fell across the entire set. Electricians, camera operators, even assistants wept quietly. It was as though the veteran actor conjured grief so palpable it infected everyone within earshot. That scene, captured in a single take, became a testament to how raw emotion can emerge in the strangest, most unexpected moments. Even wardrobe carried oddities. The antagonist's coat, a massive shearling garment, was sourced from an obscure military surplus shop. Its design, once revealed on posters, triggered a fashion frenzy, with replicas selling out worldwide. The strangeness lay in how a brutal warlord's costume became a coveted winter accessory, worn by hipsters in cafes who likely had no idea of its cinematic origins. Similarly, the thief's goggles, designed to flip upward into cat-like ears, were created almost by accident when a prop designer idly adjusted them. That improvisation became an iconic visual, demonstrating how some of the most lasting symbols are born not from planning, but from serendipity. Throughout the shoot, superstitions sprouted like weeds. Crew whispered about cursed cameras, about the uncanny timing of snow, about voices too distorted to understand. Yet these peculiarities only added to the aura of the production, making it feel less like work and more like ritual. Every mishap became myth, every accident folded into legend. By the time filming ended, the strangeness had become inseparable from the story itself. Looking back, what makes these facts so compelling is not their novelty alone, but the way they echo the film's themes. A story about resilience was forged through accidents survived. A tale of blurred morality was mirrored by coincidences that blurred fiction and reality. Even tragedy intruded, underscoring the weight of darkness and the fragile hope that art might still inspire. In its making, the film became more than entertainment. It became an event haunted by strangeness, defined by unpredictability, and immortalized by the very accidents that should have undone it. To know these behind-the-scenes truths is to realize that the story on screen is only half the tale. The other half lives in destroyed cameras, in fainting extras, in whispered superstitions, in echoes of real-world tragedy. It is a reminder that cinema is never just illusion, it is sweat, accident, coincidence, and sometimes, heartbreak. And in this case, it is also myth. The story of this film, when examined critically, is not a straightforward tale of good vanquishing evil. Instead, it operates as a meditation on collapse and endurance, on how civilizations fracture under pressure, and how individuals, broken, flawed, mortal, attempt to shoulder impossible burdens. Its significant events, when studied closely, reveal themselves not only as narrative milestones but also as layered commentaries on society, myth, and the human condition. Each moment carries symbolic weight, echoing long-standing archetypes while anchoring itself in the realities of modern anxieties. To understand its critical resonance, one must step into the heart of its most powerful events and interrogate them, not simply as sequences of action, but as texts open to interpretation. The opening hijacking in the skies above frozen landscapes is more than spectacle. On its surface, it is a demonstration of power, the antagonist revealing his precision and fearlessness. But critically, it serves as a manifesto. By orchestrating a mid-air abduction, tearing men from one plane to another with clinical brutality, he announces himself not as chaos but as order, a figure of discipline who controls every variable. Critics have noted how the sequence echoes the disorientation of terrorism in the modern age, where safety in flight is an illusion, and how it signals a shift from the anarchic villainy of the past to something more methodical and ideological. The sheer audacity of staging it with practical effects, real planes, real stunts, only heightens its impact, anchoring mythic villainy in tangible, physical reality. The event sets the tone for everything that follows. This is not fantasy, but nightmare made concrete. Equally significant is the early revelation of the protagonist's decline. Critics often linger here, because it subverts expectations of the invincible hero. Years removed from his last battle, he is now a recluse, limping through his manor, haunted by ghosts of love lost and ideals broken. From a critical perspective, this moment punctures the superhero myth by exposing its cost. He is not ageless, nor immune to trauma. He is frail, scarred, and alone. Thematically, it situates the narrative in the space of mortality. Where most cinematic guardians remain untouched by time, here we are asked to confront a figure who is visibly deteriorating. The cultural resonance is striking. In an era when audiences themselves were grappling with global exhaustion, economic, political, social, the sight of a hero too tired to rise mirrored collective disillusionment. This vulnerability made the eventual resurgence not a matter of fantasy, but of struggle against despair. One of the film's most dissected events is the collapse of the city's institutions under the antagonist's grip. The storming of stock exchanges, the mock trials overseen by a gleefully sadistic judge, the suspension of bridges, all these moments resonate with imagery pulled from revolutions and uprisings across history. Critics point to how these sequences blur the line between justice and vengeance, highlighting the terrifying ease with which liberation can become tyranny. The People's Court, where the powerful are paraded before mobs, mirrors the French Revolution's reign of terror, complete with performative justice that masks cruelty as righteousness. From a literary perspective, the event critiques the fragility of social contracts. Order, it suggests, is not an unshakable foundation but a precarious balance, easily toppled by manipulation. The film invites us to ask, is the antagonist truly liberating the people, or merely replacing one form of oppression with another? The ambiguity lingers, making the sequence less about action than about moral unease. Perhaps the most symbolically potent event is the imprisonment of the hero in the underground pit. Here, stripped of his identity, broken physically and spiritually, he confronts the abyss. The pit is not merely a prison, it is a metaphorical grave, a place where hope is extinguished by despair. Yet within this void lies the possibility of rebirth. Critics have noted the mythic resonance of the climb, the hero shedding his rope, leaping toward freedom, embodying Joseph Campbell's monomyth of death and resurrection. Thematically, the sequence encapsulates the film's central dialectic: despair as destruction, hope as defiance. Viewers are not asked to marvel at physical strength but at the audacity of belief, the refusal to surrender when surrender seems inevitable. The climb becomes one of the film's most enduring images, replayed endlessly in cultural memory because it distills the essence of rising against impossible odds. The destruction of the stadium, where thousands of citizens cheer as the ground collapses beneath their feet, is another event laden with critical symbolism. On its face, it is spectacular catastrophe, a showpiece of visual effects. Yet thematically, it speaks to fragility, the illusion of stability shattered in an instant. The scene critiques blind distraction, the willingness of society to lose itself in games while deeper rot festers. As the anthem is sung, as the crowd roars, they remain oblivious to the danger beneath them. Critics have compared it to Rome's gladiatorial arenas, where entertainment distracted from decline. The horror of the field disintegrating is not merely physical but existential. It asks the audience to consider how fragile their own institutions of joy and normalcy truly are. The final act, where the city is threatened with annihilation by a nuclear device, has drawn polarized critical interpretations. Some see it as a conventional climax, a ticking clock device familiar in action cinema. Others argue that its resonance lies in the way it externalizes despair itself. The bomb is not merely a weapon but a metaphor for inevitability, the looming shadow of extinction that can neither be reasoned with nor postponed indefinitely. Its presence forces every character to confront mortality, not just the hero, but the citizens who must decide whether to cower or resist, whether to believe in salvation or accept oblivion. From a cultural standpoint, the nuclear imagery recalls Cold War anxieties, reintroduced to a post-9/11 world still grappling with existential threats. The weapon becomes less about science fiction than about collective dread, a reminder of how modern life is always lived under invisible ticking clocks. Reception to these events was shaped as much by their themes as their execution. Critics lauded the ambition, the willingness to root spectacle in philosophy. Yet they also noted the heaviness, the sense that the film at times buckled under its own gravity. Audiences left theaters debating not only the plot twists but the questions they raised. What does it mean to sacrifice? Can revolutions ever escape corruption? Is despair stronger than hope? The conversations themselves became part of the film's legacy, ensuring its resonance extended far beyond box office numbers. Emotionally, the film struck a chord by weaving despair and hope into constant tension. The audience was asked to endure the collapse of the hero, the suffering of the city, the weight of betrayal, and yet, through it all, to cling to the possibility of renewal. This emotional rhythm mirrors the experience of crisis in real life, where despair feels overwhelming until small acts of defiance rekindle belief. Critics often describe the film less as escapism than as catharsis. It does not shield us from darkness but plunges us into it, only to show how fragile yet vital hope can be. One cannot ignore the critical discourse around its ending. The ambiguity, whether the hero truly perished or found peace in anonymity, sparked debate that endures to this day. Some saw it as a cheat, undermining sacrifice with fantasy. Others embraced it as a gift, a refusal to trap the character in martyrdom. From a critical lens, the ending embodies the tension between myth and man. As a man, he may have found rest. As a myth, he must endure. The duality ensures that the story never truly concludes, instead rippling outward into interpretation. What cements the film's resonance is how its events mirror contemporary anxieties. Economic collapse, social unrest, terrorism, surveillance, and nuclear dread. These elements seep through the narrative not as abstract fears but as tangible textures. Critics have argued that the film functions as a time capsule of early 2010s unease, dramatizing the fractures and tensions that define the era. Yet its mythic framing ensures it transcends mere commentary, becoming instead a meditation on timeless struggles. The film's impact and reception, then, cannot be measured solely in awards or reviews. Its legacy lies in how it provoked audiences to grapple with despair and endurance, how it transformed superhero cinema into something closer to tragedy, and how its events continue to echo in cultural consciousness. Every climb from the pit, every crumbling institution, every act of defiance against inevitability. These moments are not confined to the screen. They live on as metaphors, as reminders, as provocations. Critically, the film endures not because it is flawless, but because it is haunting. Its events linger like echoes, pulling us back again and again to question what they mean. And in that questioning, in the debates, the arguments, the analyses, it achieves its greatest triumph. It rises, again and again, not just as cinema, but as myth. The story of this film's creation is almost as compelling as the one it tells on screen. Every frame carries with it the weight of logistical daring, creative risk, and the strange improvisations that happen only when hundreds of people converge on a single vision. What looks seamless in theaters is, in truth, the result of countless improvisations, accidents, and flashes of ingenuity. To step behind the camera is to discover a tale of near disasters, small miracles, and the peculiar humor that carried the crew through a production that could have easily swallowed them whole. The director, known for his obsession with practical effects, approached this project with an almost monastic devotion to realism. Where other filmmakers might rely on digital trickery, he insisted that steel, glass, fire, and flesh collide in front of real cameras. This philosophy shaped every major set piece. Consider the opening mid-air hijacking. Rather than conjure it digitally, the crew rented an actual Lockheed C-130 and suspended a smaller fuselage beneath it, dangling it in the open sky with actors and stunt men clinging to its structure. Engineers spent weeks calculating stresses on the ropes, the weight distribution, the airflow, every variable that might turn spectacle into catastrophe. And when the sequence finally unfolded, it played less like filmmaking than like a dare, a declaration that this was cinema stripped of illusion. Crew members confessed later that they held their breath for every take, aware that one misstep could send millions of dollars, and possibly lives, plummeting into the mountains below. Filming in IMAX brought its own complications. These cameras, enormous and temperamental, were both blessing and curse. They captured detail with a clarity that felt almost supernatural, but their reels lasted barely 2 minutes before reloading. This meant that the most intense scenes had to be executed in staccato bursts, with actors performing under the pressure of a literal ticking clock. Worse, the cameras were fragile. One was obliterated when it collided with the steel carcass of the Batmobile during a chase sequence, reducing a $500,000 piece of equipment to shards. It wasn't the first to be destroyed during the trilogy, and by this point the crew joked that they should begin a cemetery for fallen IMAX machines. Yet even as costs mounted, the director refused to compromise. He argued that the texture of real IMAX film, the way it pulled the audience into vertigo-inducing clarity, could not be replicated by shortcuts. Locations became characters of their own. The city of Pittsburgh transformed into Gotham, its bridges, tunnels, and stadiums reimagined as epic battlegrounds. Residents watched in fascination as tanks rolled down their streets, as false snow blanketed sidewalks in the middle of July, as football fields cracked open before cheering crowds. Thousands of extras were recruited from local communities, sometimes for days at a time. Many later admitted that they spent hours screaming and panicking under the summer sun, pretending to freeze, fainting from heat exhaustion while cameras captured their terror. What looked like winter carnage on screen was in fact sweat, sunscreen, and bottled water backstage. Yet the illusion was so convincing that even locals who knew the trick later swore they felt a chill when they saw the scenes projected in theaters. One of the film's strangest productions was the football stadium collapse. To stage it, real players from the Pittsburgh Steelers suited up, with wide receiver Hines Ward cast as the athlete sprinting downfield as the earth disintegrates behind him. The explosions were meticulously timed, charges buried under the artificial turf, detonating one after another to mimic a chain reaction of collapse. The moment Ward outran the implosion was not staged in post-production. It was his genuine sprint, his survival instinct kicking in as blasts rattled the ground under his cleats. He later admitted that the experience was so surreal it felt like fleeing from an earthquake. Fans in the stands, mostly volunteers, screamed not only for the cameras but out of actual panic, because the noise and shaking were overwhelming. The realism of their fear became one of the film's most haunting details. Props and costumes tell their own eccentric stories. The villain's mask was perhaps the most iconic element of the production, yet it was also a source of endless frustration. Tom Hardy, who portrayed the role, struggled with muffled breathing and distorted speech. He spent long stretches between takes in discomfort, his skin raw from constant wear. Sound technicians devised elaborate systems to capture his dialogue, including hidden microphones sewn into the costume itself. Still, his voice was nearly indecipherable during early screenings, and heated debates broke out over whether to alter it. Ultimately, a compromise preserved its strangeness, leaving the character's speech a mix of menace and confusion. In international dubs, where the voice was re-recorded, audiences were baffled as to why English-speaking viewers found it so difficult, another curious artifact of cultural translation. And Hathaway's transformation into the agile thief was no less grueling. She trained in martial arts, acrobatics, and whip handling for months, pushing herself into physicality far beyond her usual performances. Yet even with all that preparation, the bat pod nearly became her undoing. During one take, the machine skidded dangerously, throwing her sideways into a camera rig. Crew members froze, fearing she had been injured, but Hathaway climbed up laughing, insisting the vehicle was simply punishing her for wearing heels. She developed a dark humor about the bike, nicknaming it the Beast, and often muttering before takes that she hoped the Beast would allow her passage. Those little jokes became part of the set's folklore. Joseph Gordon-Levitt carried his own odd rituals. He would ride an ordinary bicycle through the city during night shoots, still in full police uniform, blending with real pedestrians. Onlookers assumed he was an off-duty cop pedaling home after a shift. He enjoyed the anonymity, though crew members often trailed him nervously, worried that one of Gotham's supposed defenders might be ticketed for riding through red lights. He also developed a habit of practicing lines out loud while cycling, his voice drifting through quiet Pittsburgh streets like an eerie monologue from a ghost officer. Michael Caine, though absent for large portions of the story, delivered behind-the-scenes moments that linger in memory. His farewell scene to the protagonist was filmed in a single take. Before the cameras rolled, he reportedly sat in silence, his eyes closed, breathing as though preparing for grief itself. When he began, the set fell silent. Electricians, grips, even hardened stunt coordinators found themselves crying as his voice cracked. No retakes were required. The scene carried an authenticity that felt unrepeatable. Caine later admitted that he drew from the fear of losing someone he loved, and the rawness of that emotion infected everyone present. Perhaps the most uncanny production detail came from the weather. Though the film staged winter and summer, with machines pumping out snow across Wall Street, nature seemed to conspire alongside the crew. Just one day after wrapping those artificial blizzards, an unseasonably early snowstorm swept across the East Coast. The coincidence left locals joking that the production had summoned real winter, that the story itself had seeped into reality. Crew members whispered that the city refused to relinquish its role, clinging to the fiction even after cameras left. One of the darkest shadows over the film's release was an event no one could have predicted: the Aurora Theatre shooting during its midnight premiere. Though not part of the production itself, the tragedy indelibly marked the film's history. Cast and crew cancelled promotional appearances, retreating into silence and grief. The strangeness lay in how a story meant to interrogate despair and hope became linked with an act of despair in the real world. Critics noted how this forever altered the film's reception, layering it with a melancholy that transcended box office numbers. Yet not all stories from the set were heavy. Humor threaded its way through production. Christian Bale, who spent much of filming brooding in isolation, occasionally broke character in the most absurd ways. Crew members recalled him singing sea shanties in full costume to lighten tension, or cracking jokes about his stiff armor by pretending he needed a crane to sit down. His mood oscillated wildly between total immersion and playful absurdity, a reminder that even legends get restless. Production design held its own set of curiosities. The pit prison, for instance, was not a digital construct but a vast physical set built in India, designed to disorient anyone who stepped inside. The crew described it as vertigo-inducing, with ladders and platforms leading into darkness. Even actors not scheduled to film sometimes wandered through it, testing the climb, joking about whether they too could escape. For extras cast as prisoners, the experience of spending days inside that cavern became oddly communal. They shared meals, played cards, and invented nicknames for one another, as though living inside a mythic dungeon. The film's soundscape carried unusual stories too. The chanting of Deshi Basera, which accompanies the rise from the pit, was recorded by thousands of fans across the globe. The director's team released an app where users could submit their own voices, layering them into the final mix. This meant that ordinary people, from dozens of countries, became part of the film's heartbeat. Critics later marveled at how communal participation, so rare in cinema, was woven into the narrative itself, as though the act of rising belonged not only to the character but to the audience as well. Wardrobe provided unexpected cultural impact. The antagonist's coat, originally sourced from a small military surplus supplier, became a fashion sensation once revealed in trailers. Demand for replicas skyrocketed, with knockoffs flooding online markets. What began as a practical costume choice for a warlord became a winter staple for style-conscious youth. Meanwhile, Hathaway's goggles, which flip upward into cat-like ears, were an accident born of idle tinkering by a prop designer. That playful experiment became iconic, proving that sometimes the most enduring visuals emerge from improvisation, not planning. Through all this, the director's obsession with secrecy hovered over production like a specter. Scripts were guarded under lock and key. Cast members received only their own scenes, with fake pages planted to mislead potential leaks. During location shoots, signs pointed to false project titles, confusing even locals who wandered onto set. Hathaway admitted that for weeks she believed she was auditioning for an entirely different role. The director delighted in this cloak-and-dagger atmosphere, convinced that mystery heightened immersion. What emerges from these anecdotes is not simply a chronicle of filmmaking, but a story of endurance, risk, and accident transformed into art. Every mishap, the destroyed cameras, the skidding bat pod, the fainting extras, was folded back into the myth of production. Every joke, every improvisation, became part of the set's folklore. The making of the film mirrored its themes: struggle, resilience, the refusal to surrender to despair. The crew often remarked that the production itself felt like a climb from the pit. Challenges loomed at every step: technical disasters, physical risks, tragic events outside their control. Yet through persistence and improvisation, they rose. And in that ascent lies the real magic: the recognition that cinema, at its core, is not just about images on screen, but about the strange, often chaotic journey of bringing them into being. The film that audiences saw was therefore more than the sum of its parts. It was the echo of stunts performed at death's edge, of cameras sacrificed in pursuit of clarity, of extras screaming not only in performance but in genuine alarm, of actors bruised, masked, exhausted, and laughing through it all. It was the echo of chants submitted by strangers across the world, woven into the sound of hope itself. It was a work born of struggle, haunted by coincidence, and lifted by the strange alchemy of art and accident. To know these production insights and fun facts is to realize that the story extends far beyond the screen. It lives in the memories of the crew, in the jokes whispered during long nights, in the scars actors carried, in the fragments of destroyed cameras buried in studio vaults. It lives in the chants of fans whose voices now rise forever in the soundtrack. And it lives in the strange coincidences, the storm after the fake snow, the tragedy after the premiere, that remind us how art and life often bleed into one another. In this way, the production becomes myth itself, a legend of filmmaking that mirrors the legend it portrays. Just as the hero rose from despair, so too did the crew rise from obstacles. Just as the city endured destruction, so too did the production endure its trials. And just as the story's ending left room for ambiguity, so too does the making of the film leave us with the sense that behind every image lies another tale, stranger and richer than we might ever imagine. The world conjured in this film is not a neutral backdrop but a breathing entity, a character in its own right. Every alley, every snow-swept boulevard, every bridge crumbling into the river carries the burden of symbolism. To analyze the setting is to unearth the very soul of the narrative, for it is the city, scarred, restless, and vulnerable, that frames the struggles of those who fight to save or destroy it. And just as the human characters carry their contradictions, so too does this urban sprawl. Modern yet decaying, opulent yet fractured, hopeful yet perpetually on the edge of collapse. The cinematography, working hand in glove with design and location, transforms these spaces into emotional landscapes, embedding meaning into steel and stone. The skyline immediately conveys a sense of mythic grandeur. Towering skyscrapers are filmed not with the glossy sheen of triumph but with a weight that feels oppressive, as though the city itself is weary of its own ambitions. Wide establishing shots sweep across bridges and rivers, grounding the city in realism while simultaneously elevating it into archetype. The director, known for his preference for shooting in real environments rather than digital constructs, chose actual cities, Pittsburgh, New York, Los Angeles, London, to form a patchwork that becomes a fictional metropolis. This fusion of authenticity creates a city that feels both familiar and alien, a distorted mirror where audiences recognize echoes of their own streets yet sense a darkness uniquely its own. One of the most striking settings is the football stadium, captured in sweeping IMAX detail. Its architecture radiates communal celebration, an arena where thousands gather for joy and spectacle. Yet in a single shattering moment, it becomes a graveyard, the ground erupting in explosions while a lone player sprints toward survival. From a critical viewpoint, this transformation of a space of play into a space of annihilation encapsulates the fragility of normalcy. Cinematography heightens this contrast. The camera soars above the green field, then plunges down into dust and collapse, trapping the audience between awe and dread. The scene lingers in cultural memory because it destabilizes something as ordinary as a sports game, revealing how thin the veneer of security truly is. The stock exchange raid offers another telling example of how setting and story entwine. The interior, filled with gleaming screens and the hum of commerce, symbolizes wealth and control. But when armed figures burst in, chaos shatters its sleek order. The camera shifts from static, ordered frames to kinetic, handheld shots, visually echoing the disruption. The location itself critiques the fragility of financial systems, suggesting that even the heart of economic power is not immune to collapse. Critics often point to how this scene mirrors contemporary anxieties about markets and inequality, embedding political commentary into architecture. No discussion of setting is complete without the prison pit. Unlike the sleek modernity of the city, this space is primitive, carved into the earth like a scar. The cinematography isolates it in contrast to urban steel, bathing it in harsh natural light that emphasizes stone, dust, and sweat. The verticality of the pit, its walls stretching into unreachable sky, becomes both literal obstacle and metaphor. The framing emphasizes the climb, the desperate leaps that end in failure, until finally one succeeds. In these shots, light itself becomes narrative. As the camera tracks upward, brightness grows, symbolizing the struggle against despair. The pit is less a location than an archetype of rebirth, a mythological underworld where one must die symbolically in order to rise again. Winter transforms the city into a visual metaphor. Though shot during summer months, the streets are blanketed with artificial snow, an eerie inversion of reality. The cold is not cozy but suffocating, a false season imposed by tyranny. Cinematography leans into desaturated palettes, grays, whites, the muted tones of a city drained of vitality. Against this bleakness, fire and explosions blaze with almost unbearable intensity, visualizing hope and destruction as intertwined forces. Critics have observed how the juxtaposition of white snow and red flames evokes imagery of apocalypse, a cleansing through both freeze and fire. Thematically, winter signifies stasis, the city trapped under a pall of oppression until the thaw of renewal. The use of bridges is particularly symbolic. These structures, filmed in wide shots that emphasize their scale, become instruments of isolation when destroyed. Explosives reduce them to twisted steel, severing the city from the outside world. The imagery is both literal and psychological. A metropolis cut off, left to fend for itself, its people prisoners within their own streets. Cinematography heightens this by shooting the collapses from both aerial and ground perspectives, allowing the audience to feel both the grand scale of destruction and the intimate terror of those trapped. Bridges here represent not only physical connection but also the fragile ties of community and civilization, ties easily broken. Even interiors speak volumes. The lavish manner of the protagonist, filmed in shadow and silence, feels less like a home than a mausoleum. Its cavernous halls and towering ceilings dwarf the solitary figure limping through them, emphasizing isolation. Dust motes drift through shafts of light, visual shorthand for decay. The cinematography here favors stillness, slow pans that linger on absence. The house becomes a metaphor for memory, grand but hollow, a reminder of what was lost. Its eventual destruction carries symbolic weight, the end of a chapter, the burning of history to make way for renewal. Cinematography itself acts as narrative guide. IMAX cameras capture scope that borders on overwhelming, pulling audiences into vertigo with aerial shots of skyscrapers and plunging them into claustrophobia with tight frames of combat. The choice to avoid 3D in favor of this large-format realism was deliberate. The director sought immersion not through artificial depth but through overwhelming scale. The result is a film that feels visceral, where the audience doesn't watch events but inhabits them. The stadium collapse, the climb from the pit, the aerial dogfights, all achieve their power through sheer scale, framed with precision that makes the unreal feel immediate. Lighting plays its own role in sculpting mood. Shadows dominate interiors, cloaking characters in ambiguity, while exteriors often feature harsh natural light, exposing every flaw. The contrast suggests that corruption thrives in darkness, while truth, however painful, emerges in light. The antagonist, often filmed from low angles with light spilling around the edges of his mask, becomes less man than silhouette, an emblem of inevitability. The thief, by contrast, is frequently lit in shifting tones, her face half in shadow, half illuminated, embodying her moral ambiguity. These choices create emotional resonance, embedding character psychology into visual form. Color palettes reinforce themes of despair and hope. Grays and muted blues saturate the city under tyranny, while warmer hues return in moments of resilience. The climb from the pit, bathed in golden light, contrasts sharply with the cold whites of the occupied city. Critics often interpret this as a visual language of rebirth, from darkness and ice to light and fire. The subtle shifts in tone are not accidental but meticulously planned, guiding the audience's subconscious interpretation of events. Sound design intersects with setting to heighten immersion. The chant of Deshi Basara, layered from thousands of global voices, reverberates through the pit, turning stone walls into amplifiers of myth. Explosions echo differently in snowy streets versus enclosed tunnels, grounding spectacle in tangible acoustics. The score, pulsing with relentless rhythm, merges with the visual to transform locations into emotional landscapes. When the city is under siege, the music pounds like a heartbeat in panic. When the climb succeeds, silence briefly reigns, broken only by the surge of triumphant voices. Even minor settings receive critical attention. Courtrooms turned into stages for mock justice, sewers where conspiracies breed, rooftops where fragile alliances spark, all are filmed with an eye toward symbolism. The courtroom, shot in harsh, unflattering light, transforms law into theater. The sewers, filmed with low ceilings and damp textures, embody hidden rot beneath the city's surface. Rooftops, bathed in twilight, become liminal spaces between darkness and dawn, between despair and possibility. Each location is meticulously chosen and photographed to reinforce theme. The film's atmosphere, then, emerges from the synergy of place and image. The city is not merely where the story happens. It is the story. Its collapse and renewal mirror the collapse and renewal of its characters. The cinematography, by capturing real environments with heightened realism, grounds myth in flesh and stone. Visual elements, light, color, shadow, scope, work in concert to sculpt emotion, turning spectacle into metaphor. Critics have long argued that the success of this film lies not simply in its narrative, but in its ability to make environments carry meaning. The stadium is more than a stadium. It is the fragility of joy. The pit is more than a pit. It is the inevitability of despair and the miracle of hope. The bridges are more than steel. They are the tenuous ties of civilization. The manor is more than a home. It is the tomb of memory. Every place becomes parable, every shot a lesson in how setting is story. And when the final act unfolds, with the city bathed in winter fire, bridges destroyed, streets erupting in revolt, the cumulative effect is overwhelming. Audiences do not simply watch characters battle. They watch spaces collapse and transform. The environment itself participates in the drama, amplifying emotion until it becomes mythic. To trace the settings and cinematic elements of this film is to recognize that it is not just a narrative about people, but a meditation on place. It is about how spaces shape us, how cities embody our contradictions, how light and shadow can sculpt not only mood but meaning. It is a story written in architecture, filmed in vertigo, and remembered in the resonance of images that feel both real and dreamlike. And in that blend, between realism and myth, lies the film's enduring power. The tale of this film's making is almost as mythic as the one it put on screen. What audiences witnessed in theaters, snow-cloaked streets, collapsing stadiums, masked villains growling their philosophies, and a weary hero clawing his way from despair, was the culmination of years of obsession, improvisation, and a constant wrestling match between vision and reality. Behind the camera, hundreds of people navigated both comedy and catastrophe. And in the shadows of those colossal images, the production lived a story of its own, a story filled with accidents, laughter, whispered superstitions, and a deep, unshakable commitment to getting it right no matter the cost. The atmosphere on set was often contradictory, veering between solemn intensity and sudden bursts of absurd humor. Christian Bale, the actor whose performance was the spine of the trilogy, approached his role with monk-like seriousness. He often withdrew between takes, sitting alone in silence, preserving the weary solitude of his character. Crew members would pass him in corridors and feel as though they were glimpsing the ghost of a man already buried under his burden. Yet just as often, he would puncture that intensity with unexpected levity. Once, in full armored costume, he broke into sea shanties while waiting for cameras to reset. Another day, he exaggerated his stiffness, waddling like a robot penguin and complaining that he needed hydraulic lifts to bend at the knees. These sudden eruptions of humor, so at odds with his reputation for severity, became cherished memories for those who spent endless nights capturing scene after scene. Tom Hardy, meanwhile, endured his own peculiar challenges. The mask that defined his character was both blessing and curse. It gave him his most distinctive quality, an eerie, muffled growl, but also left him suffocating after long takes. Sweat pooled beneath the apparatus, and his skin grew raw from the straps. Yet Hardy's commitment was absolute. He kept his posture and voice even off camera, ordering food in the same distorted tone that bewildered caterers. Crew members joked that they never met Tom Hardy on set, only the mask. And still, through all the discomfort, Hardy's performance radiated menace. He often improvised subtle physical gestures, placing a hand gently on another character's shoulder before unleashing violence that left even veteran crew members unsettled. Amid all this, tragedy loomed. The Aurora Theater shooting during the film's premiere cast a shadow that none could have anticipated. Though not part of the production itself, it permanently altered how cast and crew remembered their work. Promotion halted, red carpets were abandoned, and grief settled in. It became impossible to separate the story of the film from the sorrow of that night. Cast members spoke of carrying the weight of it for years, a reminder that even art meant to inspire could become entangled with despair. And yet, through all difficulties, camaraderie bound the production together. Cast and crew, bruised, exhausted, half delirious from night shoots and physical demands, leaned on each other. Hardy and Bale, despite their characters' brutal conflict, often shared jokes between takes, laughing about the absurdity of pretending to pummel one another for hours. Hathaway organized small gatherings to celebrate crew birthdays, ensuring no one felt forgotten. Gordon-Levitt played guitar during downtime, offering music as relief. Even the director, notorious for his stern focus, occasionally joined in laughter, though always with the air of a man reluctant to break character himself. By the time filming wrapped, the production had become its own legend. Destroyed cameras, fainting extras, snowball fights, masks that suffocated, chants recorded by strangers, tragedies that reshaped memory. These elements fused into a tapestry as strange and haunting as the story told on screen. The film may have been about despair and hope, collapse and renewal, but the making of it mirrored those same themes. Crew endured hardship, accidents and sorrow, yet rose each day to create something larger than themselves. The behind-the-scenes insights reveal a paradox. A film so heavy in tone was born from a set often buoyed by laughter. A film so obsessed with despair was created by people constantly finding humor in absurdity. A story about isolation emerged from a production that thrived on camaraderie. These contradictions are what give the final work its strange alchemy. It is not just the vision of one director, but the lived experiences of hundreds, their sweat, their jokes, their tears, their accidents, that make the story resonate. To step into these insights is to understand that cinema is not magic. It is work, often grueling, often dangerous, always unpredictable. And yet, in its accidents and improvisations, magic emerges. The film that audiences remember is not just a narrative crafted for screen, but a monument to the people who risked, endured, and laughed through its creation. In that sense, the behind-the-scenes story is not secondary. It is the other half of the myth. The story of this film does not unfold merely through its dialogue or battles. Beneath the explosions, the crumbling towers, the massed speeches, lies a dense network of themes and symbols that give the narrative its gravity. To watch it casually is to witness a spectacle of fire and steel. To examine it critically is to recognize that every image, every motif, every whispered word carries philosophical weight. The director and writers stitched together a tapestry not just of action but of ideas, embedding meaning into shadows, colors, prisons, chants, and even silence. These thematic threads and symbolic markers transform the film from entertainment into myth. At its heart, the film is a meditation on despair and hope. Despair is not portrayed simply as sadness or defeat, but as a crushing inevitability, a force that robs choice from those it ensnares. The pit prison embodies this perfectly. Its sheer walls, the impossibility of escape, the voices whispering of failed climbs, all of these are materializations of despair itself. When the protagonist attempts to ascend with the safety of a rope, he fails. Only when he abandons security, leaping into uncertainty, does he succeed. This act becomes the symbol of hope, not naive optimism, but belief in the face of inevitability. Hope here is irrational, dangerous, and yet the only path to freedom. The scene resonates because it externalizes a truth many recognize, that hope often requires risk, the abandonment of safety, the leap into the unknown. Equally significant is the theme of legacy. The protagonist has always embodied more than flesh. He has been a symbol. Yet as time erodes his body, he must confront the reality that no one can wear the mask forever. The introduction of the young detective, whose conviction mirrors the idealism of the past, plants the seed of continuity. This character becomes the embodiment of the question: can an idea outlive the man who first carried it? The mansion's eventual destruction, the emptying of the estate, and the subtle passing of tools and knowledge serve as metaphors for this transition. Legacy here is not about immortality of the self, but immortality of meaning. The mask, the myth, survives by passing into new hands. Revolution versus tyranny is another central theme. On its surface, the antagonist's campaign appears to liberate the oppressed. Bridges are destroyed, prisons are opened, the wealthy dragged from their homes. Yet what masquerades as liberation quickly reveals itself as vengeance dressed in rhetoric. Show trials, executions, mobs empowered to plunder, all become instruments not of justice but of oppression. This inversion is symbolized most vividly in the courthouse, where law itself is turned into spectacle. The judge sits not as arbiter but as performer, pronouncing sentences that mock the very concept of fairness. The symbol of justice, twisted into theater, becomes the critique. Revolutions can replicate the very tyrannies they claim to abolish. The city itself functions as a symbol of civilization. Its towers represent ambition, its underground sewers corruption, its bridges connection, and its snow-covered streets stagnation. When bridges collapse, it is not only the city that is cut off but the very idea of community and belonging. When snow buries avenues, it is not merely a season but a suffocating stasis imposed by oppression. The city endures destruction and yet refuses to vanish, symbolizing humanity's resilience. Its endurance mirrors that of the protagonist, scarred and broken yet unwilling to surrender. Symbols of duality permeate the narrative. The thief embodies both self-interest and the yearning for redemption. She wears masks of cynicism but cannot entirely smother the flicker of principle. Her goggles, flipping upward into cat-like ears, symbolize her ambivalence. She is at once predator and ally, shadow and partner. Similarly, the antagonist is both savior and destroyer, his mask both prison and liberation. His physical strength represents discipline, but his ideology reveals fanaticism. These contradictions remind us that characters here are never singular. Each contains multiplicity, and it is this refusal to simplify them that gives the story its resonance. Another recurring theme is sacrifice. Sacrifice is not portrayed as heroic flourish but as devastating necessity. The protagonist's return to the city, his willingness to carry a bomb away at the cost of his life, represents ultimate surrender of self. Yet sacrifice is not confined to him alone. The butler sacrifices companionship, choosing to walk away rather than watch the man he raised destroy himself. The commissioner sacrifices his reputation, hiding truths that preserve fragile peace. Even the antagonist, in his final revelation, is revealed as a man who sacrificed personal peace for loyalty to another's vengeance. In each case, and Hathaway, tasked with embodying the agile thief, threw herself into training. Months of martial arts and acrobatics prepared her for the whip-quick movements that became her signature. Yet she was not immune to mishaps. One day, while rehearsing a fight sequence, she misjudged her footing and landed flat on her back, the wind knocked out of her. For a moment, the set froze, fearing she was injured. Then, still lying on the ground, she muttered dryly, "Well, that was graceful." The tension broke into laughter, and Hathaway rose, brushing herself off, insisting on running the stunt again. Her resilience and humor earned her deep respect among the stunt team, who often marveled at her willingness to attempt maneuvers even seasoned performers hesitated to try. The Batpod, that monstrous motorcycle designed for impossible stunts, became a character of its own. Crew members called it the Beast, and it lived up to its name. During one take, as Hathaway accelerated into a sharp turn, the machine skidded dangerously, nearly toppling into a camera rig. Gasps erupted across the set, but Hathaway, regaining control at the last moment, laughed it off. From then on, she joked before every ride that she was asking the Beast for permission. Others on set adopted the superstition, patting the vehicle like a horse before mounting it, as though it were a temperamental creature that might buck without warning. Joseph Gordon-Levitt approached his role with quiet discipline but also brought quirks of his own. He often bicycled through the city during night shoots, still wearing his police costume. Locals who spotted him assumed he was an exhausted officer finishing his shift, unaware they were glimpsing an actor moving between set and hotel. Crew members followed discreetly, nervous he might attract unwanted attention, but he relished the anonymity, later confessing he enjoyed watching people believe in his disguise. More than once, pedestrians shouted, "Thanks for your service," as he pedaled by, leaving him both embarrassed and amused. The director's commitment to practical effects meant challenges bordered on the insane. The opening hijacking sequence was staged in Iceland, with a real C-130 Hercules aircraft and a fuselage suspended beneath it. Engineers devised a system of wires and rigs to detach panels mid-flight, all while stunt performers clung to steel as the wind howled around them. Crew members described the experience as both terrifying and exhilarating, a stunt so audacious it felt like tempting fate. Every moment risked disaster, yet the footage captured was breathtaking. Later, when audiences gasped in disbelief, they had no idea how close those stunts had come to collapse. The IMAX cameras, heralded for their clarity, were as temperamental as divas. They weighed hundreds of pounds, whirred loudly, and could shoot for only a couple of minutes before needing to be reloaded. Worse, they had a habit of dying spectacularly. One was destroyed outright when it collided with the hulking Batmobile, splintering into useless parts. Crew members mourned its loss as though it were a fallen comrade. It was not the first camera sacrificed during the trilogy, and whispers spread that the machines were cursed. Operators joked nervously whenever one was wheeled onto set, muttering that the city always claims another. The stadium collapse in Pittsburgh became a production legend. Real Steelers players suited up, with wide receiver Hines Ward cast as the athlete sprinting across the field as the turf exploded behind him. The detonations were real, charges rigged under the artificial surface to erupt in sequence. Ward's sprint, captured in slow motion, was genuine instinct. He admitted later that he was running not just for the cameras but for his life. Extras in the stands, mostly locals, screamed with such convincing panic that the line between acting and reality blurred. Many later said they forgot they were part of a film. The thunder of explosions made the fear real. The scene, unforgettable in theaters, had already carved itself into memory on the day it was shot. Humor often saved the crew from exhaustion. Long night shoots in sub-zero temperatures, or worse, sweltering heat disguised as winter, pushed everyone to their limits. Snow machines churned artificial flurries across New York streets during blazing July afternoons, leaving extras sweltering in coats while pretending to shiver. Some fainted, others improvised jokes, staging mock snowball fights with clumps of shaved ice. Even the director, usually stoic, cracked a smile when Hathaway threw a snowball at Hardy, bouncing it off his mask with a muffled thunk. Michael Caine, whose role was smaller in this installment, nonetheless delivered one of the set's most powerful moments. His farewell scene to Bale was captured in a single take. Before shooting, he sat silently, gathering emotion. When he finally spoke, his voice broke, and real tears streamed down his face. The crew, hardened veterans of explosions and stunts, wept openly. The director refused a second take, declaring that no repetition could capture such raw grief. For many, it was the most unforgettable moment of the entire production. There were mishaps that veered into the bizarre. During a rooftop chase, a stuntman miscalculated a leap and crashed through a fragile set piece, landing unhurt but startled. Crew members, rushing to his aid, found him laughing uncontrollably, insisting he had just proven the set's fragility test. Another day, an extra tasked with running in panic tripped and slid across icy pavement, popping up with arms raised like a victorious skater, drawing applause from onlookers. These accidents, while minor, became folklore, stories told and retold during long hours of downtime. Not all challenges were physical. Secrecy haunted the production. Scripts were locked in vaults, and fake working titles were used to mislead the curious. Even cast members received only their own pages, with fabricated lines inserted to throw off leaks. Hathaway initially believed she was auditioning for an entirely different role, practicing maniacal laughter for weeks under the impression she was reading for Harley Quinn. When she learned the truth, she laughed until she cried, grateful she hadn't been asked to cackle on camera. Music even carried its own behind-the-scenes twist. The chant, Deshi Basara, which underscores the climb from the pit, was created by layering thousands of fan submissions from around the globe. The sound team released an app, inviting people to record themselves chanting. Those voices, ordinary and scattered, became woven into the film's heartbeat. It was the audience themselves who lifted the character out of the pit, their anonymous shouts immortalized in myth. Behind the scenes, stories unfolded that mirrored the contradictions of the film itself. Bale brooded in silence, then broke into absurd sea shanties. Hardy suffocated under his mask but transformed that pain into menace. Hathaway fell, bruised, laughed, and rose again. Cameras shattered. Extras fainted in July snow. A football player sprinted for survival across a collapsing field. And tragedy outside the film, the Aurora shooting, cast a shadow that none could have foreseen, binding the movie forever with grief. These anecdotes remind us that art is never separate from life. It is shaped by accidents, coincidences, and sorrows. Interviews revealed the humanity behind the myth. Actors spoke of fear, of doubt, of exhaustion, of pride. Audiences responded with equal intensity, some debating the ending, others confessing that the chant helped them endure their own struggles. Reviews praised ambition, critiqued density, but always engaged with passion. This is the truest measure of impact. Not whether a film is flawless, but whether it provokes, whether it embeds itself into memory and conversation. Even the box office story carried symbolic weight. The techniques of realism and IMAX immersion transformed screenings into events, fueling demand and making the film one of the highest-grossing of its era. Yet that success was tempered by tragedy, reminding us that numbers cannot capture the full story. The legacy was not only commercial but cultural. Chants echoing in sports arenas, voices debating endings, students studying its editing rhythms, directors citing its practical stunts as inspiration. As this exploration unfolded, we have seen how every element, characters, techniques, symbols, behind-the-scenes tales, interviews, reviews, forms part of a larger whole. They are not fragments but interlocking gears in a machine that produced something greater than entertainment. The film became myth because it demanded to be engaged with, questioned, and interpreted. It was never meant to vanish after credits but to linger, to haunt, to be retold in essays, in debates, in whispered chants that still rise. And so the conclusion is not an ending but a recognition. We have examined despair and hope, collapse and renewal, flesh and mask, myth and mortality. We have listened to the voices of those who made it and those who witnessed it. We have traced techniques into philosophy, box office into culture. What remains is the realization that cinema at its best is not passive spectacle but active myth-making. It forces us to ask who we are, what we fear, and what we hope to become. For those who have traveled through this long analysis, let this be the final climb. The recognition that stories endure because they demand our participation. This tale of despair and renewal is not confined to one city or one mask. It belongs to anyone who has faced despair and chosen, however irrationally, to rise. If you have found this exploration rewarding, if you wish to continue examining films not just as entertainment but as layered texts filled with meaning, then stay with us. Subscribe to this channel, not for mere summaries, but for deep journeys into cinematic language, thematic resonance, and the strange alchemy of filmmaking. Here, every film will be treated not as disposable spectacle but as myth, as text, as living reflection of our world. Join us again as we continue to pull apart the threads of cinema, weaving them back into stories that resonate long after credits roll. Subscribe, share, and keep the dialogue alive. For just as the chant called voices from across the globe into a single sound, so too does this channel thrive on the collective voices of its viewers, questioning, debating, interpreting. Together, we rise.